There's a specific kind of credibility that comes from a story crossing borders. When something stays inside British tabloids, it's easy to write off as noise. But when an American network with global reach starts treating a story seriously enough to build a whole segment around it, multiple angles, multiple voices, direct public engagement rather than pure speculation, that usually means the conversation has outgrown its original this neighbourhood.
We are following a surprising new chapter for Prince Harry and Meghan. CNN has learnt the Sussexes are moving back to Britain 6 years after stepping away from royal life and moving to the US. King Charles was first informed of their plans on Sunday. Harry and Meghan will remain private citizens and non-working members of the royal family as they prepare to move into a private residence outside London later this month. Well, for more on this, I want to bring in our Royal Watcher, Badisha Mamata, and CNN Chief Media Analyst, Brian Stelter. Welcome to you both. So, Badisha, look, let's just get straight to the big question here, which is why is now the moment for Harry and Meghan to come back? And do you sense that there's a bit of unfinished business here for Harry in particular in Britain?
I think you're absolutely right. And I'm so glad that you used the phrase a surprising new chapter rather than a surprising new episode, because really this had come to look like a bit of a soap opera. And the feeling that I have is that finally normal service is being resumed. I think this is driven by Harry himself. I think it's personal. I think it's a mature, normal, responsible human thing to do and want and think. It involves the royal family coming back together, involving his father, the king, and his brother, Prince William, the Prince of Wales. This is something that feels right. And even the timing and the way they express it of wanting to put their kids into British schools come September, come the new term, new start, it all seems refreshingly normal to me and not hysterical and not something for some kind of Netflix drama.
Yes, a promising new chapter. I mean, another big question being talked about here at the moment is that of security, because you'll know, Badisha, that Harry has repeatedly cited security concerns as a reason for staying away. So what may have changed here, do you think?
Right. Well, given that this is a surprise announcement and that we didn't get an inkling of it before, clearly during the preceding months, they have been working out some kind of private or maybe not private, maybe governmental security arrangement. The fact that they feel secure enough to make this public statement right now makes me think that this has all been sorted, but nobody is going to get any of the details of that just yet. We know that the Prince and Meghan herself are very, very cautious about security. So I'm 100% sure that as parents, simply as parents, they wouldn't do anything to put their kids at risk. So I am so sure that a deal has been struck and that they are all happy with it, even if it's very expensive, even if it involves lots of different stakeholders. They have got this one to a level that they're now happy with, enough to make a gigantic move, a very, very big move in their family.
Yeah, you're right. We're unlikely to know any of the details. And we actually heard the UK Prime Minister Andy Burnham this morning coming out and saying it was a private matter. Brian, to the children, to the family aspect here, I mean, Archie and Lilibet, Meghan and Harry's children, have been very much kept out of the spotlight up to now. What challenges do you foresee for them growing up in Britain, given the intense media interest there is around this family, and something that Harry and William have been very honest about, the fact that they've struggled with a lot?
Yeah, I really sympathize for what they're about to probably go through. I talked to Harry about this a number of years ago, about what that media scrutiny is like, especially when you have young children. It's something that many celebrities, of course, face, and many celebrities have different ways of dealing with. It may be harder to keep the children out of the proverbial picture in the UK in some ways for some reasons, but they've clearly had time, a lot of time, to think through this and make this choice.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. But Badisha, first, we've actually been getting in some reaction from the streets of London today to this news. I just want to have a quick play of that. Let's listen.
Surprised, but on the other hand, I can kind of see for him Probably feels a bit cast aside. So he's come back, and I guess the guy lost his mother, so cut him a break sort of thing.
I think they get a bad rap. I think they're a beautiful couple, and, they've done a lot of good work around the world. And I think, especially Meghan Markle, I don't know why everybody in the UK is always so, up in arms about her. I think she's wonderful, So I hope they have a good time when they come back and the press leaves them alone, quite frankly, and they can just enjoy their life and raise their kids.
Patricia, that's just a sort of sliver of the range of opinions here.
This is a very complex situation, and it does involve our narrative around power and ambition, and it involves all of our ideas around what's the royal family for? Is it to give the public something to be entertained by? Is it about upholding tradition? Is it a kind of British soft power export where something entertaining always has to be happening? Or is this very private and personal? Is it to do with a romance, or to do with these two being parents? All of those things are true simultaneously, and that's why we find it so compelling. But it's also why they're in such a tricky position. I do agree that this Hollywood dream, it's such a fantasy for so many people. It's actually quite a universal fantasy in many ways. I'm going to go away, and in this other place where the sun always shines, everything is going to be peaceful, and all my problems will go away. I also don't want to make prognostications or overly analyze their own particular relationship, but Harry and Meghan are two very different people. It's Meghan who came to Britain. She really didn't rub along with the royal family and with its protocols. And he too, I think, he went to America, and for the first couple of years, perhaps he thought, well, this is so lovely. It's easy. I can be a celebrity without being a royal. But of course, they're going to be pulled back to their own individual ambitions, their own backgrounds, their own desires. This is only the beginning of a new story. But I do think that this is fundamentally a very personal decision, and it's to do with family, their own family, but also the generation above. They want to spend time with the king.
Neighbourhood. Let's get back to the Royal Truth Desk. Today, we're looking at a recent CNN discussion centred on Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's reported return to the UK, and the ripple effect it's created around questions of security, King Charles, Prince William, and where this entire family story might be heading next. Let's start with why this coverage matters as much as it does. British royal reporting has its own ecosystem, its own tabloids, its own recurring cast of commentators who've been saying roughly the same things for years, largely settled into their existing positions. American coverage tends to approach the story from a different angle, often with less institutional baggage and less emotional investment in any particular outcome. When a major international network picks this topic up and treats it as a legitimate evolving situation, that's a signal the conversation has moved beyond a purely domestic obsession into something with genuine international interest, and it often ends up surfacing questions the domestic conversation stopped asking long ago. So what's actually being discussed? At the centre is the reported possibility of Harry and Meghan relocating back to the UK, at least partially, and the question that immediately follows any version of this story: security. This has been the single most persistent, unresolved thread running through the entire Sussex saga since 2020, and it remains exactly that here. Whatever emotional or relational developments might be happening between Harry and his family, none of it translates into anything practical without a workable security arrangement actually in place. For Harry, for Meghan, and for their children, who deserve to be part of this conversation as more than a footnote to royal politics. What's genuinely interesting about this round of coverage is that it treats security less as a vague obstacle mentioned in passing and more as a real, discussable variable. Whether that involves Harry's ongoing legal challenge over his previous security downgrade finally reaching resolution, some quiet negotiation happening behind the scenes, or simply enough practical progress to make regular visits or a longer stay realistic. The point is, security has stopped being a footnote. It's arguably the entire foundation everything else gets built on top of. We should be careful not to overstate what's actually confirmed here, because plenty remains genuinely uncertain. But the fact that serious international coverage is discussing this with real specificity rather than dismissing it as an unresolved dead end suggests something may have shifted after years of this particular door staying shut. Now, let's talk about the street-level reactions from London, because this is honestly one of the more valuable parts of coverage like this, something purely commentator-driven royal content usually misses. When ordinary people are stopped and asked directly what they think, rather than royal insiders or professional commentators, you get a messier, more honest cross-section of opinion than polished editorial pieces typically offer. Some express genuine warmth, framing any return as a natural, overdue step toward healing a rift that's dragged on too long. Families should be given room to repair, and continued scrutiny over one family's private reconciliation feels excessive at this point. Others remain openly sceptical, citing years of accumulated tension and grievances aired publicly through interviews and books. And plenty land in between, curious, a little worn down, mostly just wondering whether this is real movement or another headline that fades in a few weeks. That range matters because it tells us this story doesn't have a single unified public verdict. And notably, most of it doesn't map cleanly onto simple Team Harry versus Team William thinking. Some of the scepticism isn't really about the Sussexes specifically at all. It's about general fatigue with the non-stop churn of royal drama. Some of the warmth isn't about specific policy questions like security or titles. It's a simpler human hope that a family, any family, can eventually find its way back to something resembling normal. Most people, asked plainly, seem far less tribal and far more measured than the loudest corners of social media would suggest. That's honestly one of the more underappreciated value of this kind of on-the-ground reporting. It acts as a useful corrective against the assumption that online sentiment, which tends to be louder, more polarized, and more performative, accurately reflects how most people actually feel. Comment sections and social media threads reward strong, quotable opinions. A stranger stopped on a London street with a camera in their face has far less incentive to perform outrage or devotion for an algorithm. What comes through instead tends to be closer to how people genuinely think about this family when nobody's grading their answer. Let's get into King Charles specifically, because his position deserves more nuance than it usually receives. He occupies two roles simultaneously that don't always pull in the same direction. A father who, by every reasonable indication, wants closeness with his son and grandchildren, and a monarch who has to weigh every decision against institutional stability, precedent, and public perception. That tension is real, and navigating it is probably harder than most outside commentary credits. If genuine movement toward reconciliation is happening, it likely reflects Charles finding some workable balance between those roles rather than simply choosing one over the other, which would also explain why any progress has unfolded gradually and quietly, rather than through one big, dramatic announcement. That kind of balancing act rarely happens all at once. It's far more likely to look like a series of small, careful steps that only become visible as a pattern in retrospect. William's position is, if anything, even more layered, arguably the most emotionally complicated piece of this whole story. The relationship between the two brothers has absorbed the deepest public damage of anything in this saga. Specific publicly aired grievances laid out through a memoir, a documentary, and various interviews, which have made this particular relationship feel uniquely fragile compared to the broader family tension. It's worth saying plainly, even meaningful progress on the Harry-Charles front or genuine movement on security logistics doesn't automatically translate into anything resolved between the brothers. Physical proximity and emotional reconciliation are not the same thing, and conflating them sets up expectations reality probably can't meet on any predictable timeline. Still, it's worth holding on to some hope here, because distance has clearly made an already difficult relationship harder to repair. Rebuilding anything almost entirely through public statements, legal representatives, and rare tense public appearances is a brutal way to heal something this personal. If Harry is genuinely more present in the UK going forward, that at minimum creates space for the kind of small, low-stakes interaction that doesn't require a grand gesture. Just ordinary overlap that might slowly rebuild some familiarity over time. Whether William is currently open to that kind of gradual rebuild is something nobody outside the family genuinely knows, but the geography at least makes it more theoretically possible than it's been in years. It's also worth considering William's own position from a slightly different angle. As the future king, every choice he makes around Harry gets read not just as a personal decision, but as a signal about how the monarchy itself will eventually handle family tension once he's the one setting the tone. That's an enormous amount of pressure to carry into what, at its core, is still just a relationship between two brothers who grew up together, lost their mother together, and now find themselves on opposite sides of an ocean and an institution. It's worth remembering that whatever William decides here, he's not just making a personal choice. He's setting a precedent for how the institution he'll eventually lead handles exactly this kind of situation going forward. Meghan's position deserves its own consideration too, since she remains, for better or worse, one of the most reaction-generating figures in this entire ongoing conversation. Any high-profile UK return inevitably raises the question of how she specifically would be received, whether public sentiment has genuinely warmed over recent years, or whether renewed visibility would simply reignite the same criticism that's followed her since before she married into the family. Realistically, both things are probably true at once, just for different segments of the public. There's a real vocal group whose views have clearly softened over time. There's an equally real, equally vocal group whose views haven't moved at all and likely won't, regardless of circumstances. Meghan navigating a potential return means navigating both simultaneously, which is genuinely a lot to ask of anyone. It's worth pointing out, too, that Meghan's own career and public life have continued evolving independently of the royal narrative. Her lifestyle brand, her podcast work, her own business ventures have all given her a public identity that exists outside the framework of royal wife or royal outcast that so much commentary still defaults to. That matters here because any UK return doesn't have to be read purely through a royal lens. She's not just returning as Harry's wife. She's returning as someone who has spent the past several years building an independent public identity of her own, which arguably gives her more leverage and more autonomy over how any renewed visibility actually gets framed and managed. Catherine deserves brief mention here too, even though she sits somewhat outside the direct scope of this particular CNN discussion. Her health journey over recent years has reshaped how the public relates to the entire Wales household, generally increasing protectiveness and empathy toward her and William specifically. That shift indirectly colours how any Sussex-related development gets received as well. Heightened public protectiveness toward Catherine's peace and privacy could make some people more cautious about, or even resistant to, anything that risks disrupting it, including a high-profile Sussex return that inevitably arrives with its own wave of media attention. It's also worth digging a little deeper into what security actually means in practical terms here, because the word gets thrown around a lot without much explanation. This isn't just about a personal bodyguard tagging along to dinner. It involves formal risk assessments, coordination between multiple protective bodies, decisions about who pays for what, and a legal framework that determines exactly what level of protection a former working royal is entitled to once they've stepped back from official duties. Harry's case has been uniquely complicated precisely because he doesn't fit neatly into any of the existing categories. Not fully private citizen, not fully working royal, but something in between that the system wasn't really built to accommodate. Until that classification question gets some kind of durable answer, every other part of this story remains contingent on it. That's also part of why the CNN discussion felt different from a lot of prior coverage. It treated this not as a side issue, but as the actual hinge the whole story swings on. If Harry can't move freely and safely in the UK, none of the more emotionally compelling questions about reconciliation, family, or the children's connection to Britain can really progress in any meaningful way. Security isn't just logistics here. It's the precondition for literally everything else people actually want to talk about. There's also something worth saying about timing. Stories like this tend to resurface periodically, often coinciding with anniversaries, upcoming events, or simply a slow news cycle that makes room for renewed speculation. It's fair to ask whether this particular wave of coverage reflects genuine new developments or simply the recurring nature of a story that never fully goes away. Both things can be true simultaneously. There can be real, incremental progress happening behind the scenes, while also the public conversation about it ebbs and flows somewhat independently of the actual facts on the ground. Recognizing that distinction is part of what separates careful coverage from breathless speculation. So, stepping back from all of it, where does this leave the story? Genuinely somewhere between real signal and a familiar, well-worn pattern this saga tends to follow. Royal stories like this one have a well-established rhythm. Speculation builds, coverage intensifies, everyone starts wondering whether this is finally the real turning point. And then, more often than not, momentum either fizzles or simply folds into the ongoing background noise without ever fully resolving one way or the other. What feels genuinely different about this particular moment is the combination of factors converging simultaneously. Serious international coverage taking it seriously, actual public reaction gathered directly rather than filtered purely through commentary, and specific practical questions like security discussed with real substance instead of vague hand-waving. That combination doesn't guarantee this is the real turning point everyone's been waiting for. But it does suggest the story has genuinely moved somewhere new compared to where it sat for the past several years. We want to hear your honest take on all this. Do you think Harry and Meghan's reported UK return represents real, sustained movement? Or is this another headline destined to fade in a few weeks? Do you think proximity alone could realistically help repair things between Harry and William? Or has too much been said publicly for geography to matter much? And has your own view of Meghan specifically shifted over the past couple of years? Or has it stayed roughly the same, regardless of what's happened. Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is exactly the kind of story where hearing from people outside the usual royal commentary circuit adds something real. If this breakdown helped you make sense of a genuinely tangled story, go ahead and hit that like button. It makes a real difference for this channel. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the Royal Truth Desk and turn on notifications, because we'll be tracking every twist in this story as it continues to develop. If you'd like to support the kind of careful, independent royal coverage we do here, super thanks is always sincerely appreciated. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.